I entered this world at possibly the worst moment imaginable. My parents' marriage was already on the verge of collapse, and my arrival only added to their struggles. My name is Olivia, and from what I've been told, my father, Mark, was far from excited when my mother, Laura, broke the news of her pregnancy. "You planned this, didn't you, Laura?" he had shouted during one of their heated arguments. "You did this on purpose just to trap me." I've heard the story so many times from my mother that I can practically picture the scene, even though I was too young to remember it myself. Mom often said that Dad was too reckless, too irresponsible to handle the weight of a family. He preferred spending his paycheck on impulsive whims rather than securing a stable future for us. Their arguments filled our small home with tension for exhausting years after I was born. Sometimes the fights were about money. Other times they were about Dad's late nights out. And then there were times when I was the cause of their battles. It felt like everything could ignite another storm between them. Eventually, when I turned 5, they made it official. The divorce papers were signed, and their marriage was over. But Dad didn't stick around to see what happened next. He simply disappeared. No farewell, no forwarding address, not even a single child support payment. It was as if he had been erased from our lives, except for the emptiness he left behind and the growing bitterness in my mother's heart. "Your father is nothing but a selfish coward," she would tell me whenever I asked about him. "A real man doesn't abandon his child." Every time his name surfaced, a hardened look would settle in her eyes. Eventually I stopped asking. The only link I had to Dad's side of the family was my grandmother, Margaret. But even that relationship came with its complications. Mom and Grandma Margaret despised each other. Grandma blamed Mom for the failed marriage, insisting she had driven Dad away with constant nagging about responsibility and finances. Mom, on the other hand, couldn't stand to be in the same room as her. During my visits, she would pull up to Grandma's house, barely stopping the car before letting me out, never stepping inside herself. But once I crossed that doorstep, everything felt different. Grandma Margaret would wrap me in her arms, holding me tightly before sitting me down with stories of my father as a boy. She'd gently run her fingers through my hair, her expression soft and wistful. "You look just like him, sweetheart," she would say, a small smile tugging at her lips. His eyes, his smile. Even that little dimple when you laugh. 3 years passed in a rhythm of weekend visits, filled with warmth, homemade cookies, and memories of a father I never truly knew. By the time I turned 8, life had settled into a predictable routine: weekdays with Mom, who still harbored resentment toward Dad, and weekends with Grandma, who never stopped believing he might come back. But everything changed on a rainy Tuesday in October. That afternoon, my mother received a phone call. As she listened, the color drained from her face. "Get your coat, Olivia," she said, her voice unusually subdued. "Grandma Margaret wants to see us both. It's important." Something felt different about this visit. Normally, Mom would barely slow the car down before I hopped out, but this time, she parked and walked with me to the front door. The silence between us was thick with unspoken worry. Inside, I saw her immediately. Grandma Margaret looked smaller than I remembered, lying in bed with scattered papers around her. Her silver hair, always so neatly styled, was now unkempt, and her skin had taken on a grayish pallor that unsettled me. But when she saw us, she smiled and reached out with trembling hands. "Laura, Olivia, thank you for coming," she said, her voice frail yet still carrying warmth. "Please sit down. Both of you." Mom didn't argue, another sign that this was serious. In the corner of the room stood Mr. Reynolds, Grandma's lawyer, his presence adding to the somber atmosphere. "There's something important I need to discuss," Grandma began, looking first at me, then at my mother. "I'm not well, and I want to make sure everything is taken care of properly." She paused, catching her breath. "My house and part of my savings will go to your Aunt Karen, Olivia." I sat there, absent-mindedly twisting the hem of my sweater, not entirely understanding the weight of her words. Conversations about legal matters and arrangements had always felt distant to me. Yet something told me I needed to pay attention. "I'm setting up an educational fund for Olivia," Grandma Margaret continued, her voice growing steadier as she explained her plans. "This will cover her college expenses when she turns 18. Until then, Mr. Reynolds will manage it." At these words, Mom's posture subtly shifted. She sat up straighter, her expression tightening as her usually restless hands went still in her lap. The money can only be used for educational purposes, Mr. Reynolds added, stepping forward with a few documents in hand. Once Olivia turns 18, she will have full control over it. Mrs. Margaret has been very clear about these terms. I sat there, absent-mindedly swinging my legs, far more interested in the swirls of the wallpaper than in their conversation. College felt like something that existed in another lifetime, far beyond my world of spelling tests and the ever-important question of whether Katie Thompson would invite me to her birthday party. Everything is settled, Laura, Grandma said, reaching out for Mom's hand. For once, Mom didn't pull away. I just want to ensure that my granddaughter has opportunities, no matter what. The weight of what wasn't said, the unspoken mention of Dad, hung in the space between them. After the papers were signed and our goodbyes were exchanged, the drive home was quiet. But for the first time, it wasn't the usual strained silence. This one felt lighter, almost peaceful. As we pulled into the driveway, Mom turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before. Well, she said, a hint of a smile tugging at her lips. It seems at least one person from your father's family turned out to be decent after all. I wouldn't fully understand the significance of that moment until years later. At 8 years old, all I knew was that Grandma Margaret had done something kind for me, and for once, Mom wasn't angry about it. The concept of college money meant little to me back then. What mattered more was the butterscotch candy Grandma had slipped into my pocket as we left. She passed away just a few weeks later. Her funeral was quiet, attended by only a handful of people. I noticed for the first time that Mom actually shed a few tears, though she tried to hide them. And just like that, with Grandma gone, the last fragile connection to my father's side of the family crumbled away. Life, as it always does, moved forward. Over the next 2 years, Mom started dating a man named Richard. He seemed nice, stable, dependable. He had a good job at a bank, drove a sleek car, and always brought small gifts whenever he visited. More than that, he made Mom smile in a way I hadn't seen in years. Then one day, she sat me down with big news: they were getting married. I was 10 at the time, and the idea of having a real family again sent a surge of excitement through me. But that wasn't even the best part. Richard has a daughter your age, Mom told me. Her name is Jessica, and she'll be moving in with us. I remember nearly jumping out of my seat, my mind racing with images of sisterhood, sleepovers, whispered secrets under blankets, someone to play with who wasn't just a school friend. For the first time, I wouldn't be alone. The day Jessica and Richard moved in, I went all out. I decorated our shared room with handmade welcome signs, arranged my favorite books and toys, and made sure everything felt warm and inviting. Then she arrived. Jessica walked in, gave the room a quick glance, then turned to her dad. "Can I have my own room instead?" she asked bluntly. "I don't want to share with her. She's not really my sister." She didn't even bother lowering her voice. That was just the beginning. Jessica wasted no time securing her place at the center of Mom's attention. She would curl up beside her on the couch during movie nights, wedging herself between us as if I weren't even there. Within the first week, she had already started calling Mom Mommy, a word I had stopped using years ago. And each time she said it, Mom's eyes lit up with a kind of warmth I couldn't remember seeing directed at me. "Mom, want to see my art project?" I'd ask, holding up a carefully drawn picture. "In a minute, honey," she would reply. But that minute never came. Jessica was already showing her homework or launching into a long-winded story about her day. And then, one evening, I finally broke. I told Mom how I felt, how left out, how invisible I had become. Her response cut deeper than I could have imagined. "Don't be selfish, Olivia," she said, barely glancing up from helping Jessica with her homework. Jessica lost her mother when she was very young. She needs extra attention and a woman's love. You should understand that. I wanted to scream. "What about my love?" Instead of arguing, I simply nodded, retreating to my now eerily silent room. Jessica's untouched bed stood as a constant reminder, one that whispered a painful truth. First, I hadn't been enough for my father, and now it seemed I wasn't enough for my mother either. The shift in our family dynamic was so gradual that, at first, I barely noticed. But looking back now, I can see how every small moment, every quiet exclusion, gradually built an invisible wall between Mom and me, brick by brick, widening the distance between us. It began subtly with shopping trips. Mom would return home, her arms weighed down with glossy boutique bags overflowing with stylish jeans, trendy sneakers, and expensive tops, all for Jessica. Meanwhile, my wardrobe came from clearance racks and budget stores. "Jessica needs to keep up a certain image at her school," Mom would explain whenever I questioned the disparity. "Besides, you're not as into fashion as she is." Then came the moment that changed everything. Jessica was being enrolled at Crestwood Academy, the elite private school on the other side of town. I can still picture that dinner, the way Richard delivered the news with unmistakable pride. Jessica's test scores are outstanding, he announced, his voice filled with admiration. She needs an environment that can challenge her academically. I hesitated, gripping my fork. What about me? I asked carefully. Could I go to Riverside too? The look that passed between Mom and Richard said it all. They had already made this decision without me. Honey, Eastview Public is a great school, Mom said, her tone laced with forced reassurance. Jessica just has different needs. She's exceptionally gifted, you know. The standard curriculum is more suited to you. That night, I cried into my pillow until exhaustion took over. But something inside me hardened. Over time, I stopped seeking Mom's validation. I no longer rushed to show her my report cards or tell her about my accomplishments. I learned to stop expecting her to see me. By 15, I had accepted my place within the household hierarchy. Instead of fighting for attention, I turned inward. I poured my energy into my studies, not to impress them, but for myself. I joined the debate team, excelled in science fairs, and earned top grades. Teachers left glowing comments on my papers. Exceptional analysis, Olivia. Your future is bright, outstanding work. But at home, my achievements were barely a footnote in our family narrative. Dinner conversations revolved around Jessica, her selection for the advanced placement program, her Model UN conferences, her tennis tournaments. Jessica's English teacher says she has real potential as a writer, Mom would gush. She's a natural, straight A's without even trying, Richard would add, beaming. I sat silently, forcing down my food, thinking about my own straight A's. About how I had just won first place in the regional science fair. About how my debate coach wanted me to captain the team next year. But I said nothing. What was the point? In their eyes, my public school accomplishments could never hold the same weight as Jessica's private school accolades. Still, there were moments when the sting of it all resurfaced, like when Mom and Richard attended every one of Jessica's tennis matches but couldn't find the time to watch me compete in the debate finals. But I learned to suppress it, to shift my focus toward what truly mattered, my own future. Thanks to Grandma Margaret's foresight, I had a path forward that belonged solely to me. Senior year flew by in a whirlwind of college applications and scholarship essays. Late nights at my desk were spent sifting through university brochures, weighing my options. My grades had opened doors to schools I had only dreamed of. One offer in particular stood out, a full-ride scholarship to State University, pre-approved due to my academic achievements. You don't necessarily have to rely on scholarships, my guidance counselor, Mrs. Thompson, told me one afternoon. With your grandmother's fund, you could attend any school you want. But I had other plans. I want to be smart about it, I told her. If I can earn a full scholarship, I can save that money for a down payment on a house after graduation. Mrs. Thompson smiled knowingly. Always thinking ahead, aren't you, Olivia? 2 weeks before my 18th birthday, Mom called me downstairs for what she called a family meeting. In the living room, I found them already waiting. Mom perched tensely on the edge of her favorite armchair, Richard seated beside her, looking serious, and Jessica, avoiding my gaze. Sit down, Olivia, Mom said, patting the ottoman across from her. We need to talk about something important. I sat down, immediately noticing how official this felt. Family discussions usually happen casually over dinner and passing conversations, never in a structured setting like this. Something was off. As you know, Mom began, her tone cautious, Jessica is graduating this year as well. She hesitated, glancing at my stepsister. We've been looking at colleges, she continued. Before she could say more, Jessica cut in, finally making eye contact with me. I got accepted to Princeton, she announced, her voice brimming with excitement. It's my dream school. That's congratulations, I said, still unsure why this warranted a family meeting. Then Richard spoke up, his voice carrying an edge of urgency. The thing is, even with Jessica's excellent education at Crestwood Academy, her grades didn't quite qualify her for a full scholarship. Mom leaned forward, her expression serious. We've invested a lot in her private school education, and it's been worth every penny. But Princeton's tuition is substantial, and we just don't have the funds to cover it. I frowned, still not understanding what any of this had to do with me. And then Mom dropped the bombshell. We were hoping that, since you have your grandmother's college fund, you might be willing to share it with Jessica. The room fell into complete silence. I blinked, waiting for the punchline, waiting for Mom to laugh and say she was joking. But she didn't. Instead, she just sat there watching me expectantly. You want me to share my college fund? I repeated slowly, disbelief tightening around my throat. The one Grandma Margaret set up specifically for my education? Jessica exhaled impatiently, arms crossed. You're getting a full scholarship anyway, she said, as if that somehow justified it. You don't even need the money. Mom softened her voice, as if that would make this betrayal easier to swallow. We're family, Olivia. And family helps each other. The words hit like a punch to the gut. They wanted me to hand over my safety net. My future. My grandmother's last gift to me. And for whom? For the same Jessica who had spent years making it abundantly clear that I wasn't her family? For the same Jessica who had always had the best of everything while I settled for the scraps? The word left my lips before I even had time to fully process it. No. An immediate shift in the atmosphere. Mom's eyes hardened. What do you mean, no? I mean no. My voice was steady, even as my heart pounded. This money was left to me by my grandmother. It's mine, and I'm going to use it for my future. Richard's face turned red. Do you hear how selfish she sounds, Laura? He spat. This is exactly what I've been saying for years. A bitter laugh escaped me unplanned. Selfish. I echoed, shaking my head. That's rich coming from you too. Richard's expression darkened. Watch your tone, young lady. Then he scoffed, his voice laced with resentment. You've always been jealous of Jessica, always trying to compete with her. And now you're getting your revenge by denying her a chance at a good education. The sheer absurdity of his accusation nearly made me laugh again. Except there was nothing funny about any of this. Jealous? I repeated, staring at him. Jealous of what exactly? Of the way you've handed her everything while treating me like an afterthought. I turned my gaze to Jessica. And by the way, if she's as brilliant as you've always claimed, why didn't she earn a scholarship like I did? Jessica's lower lip trembled, her eyes welling up. Then, just as I expected, she bolted from the couch and ran upstairs, punctuating her dramatic exit with the slam of her bedroom door. Mom stood, her voice dangerously low. How dare you? She whispered, her anger controlled but simmering. How dare you be so cruel? I shot up from my seat, my hands trembling. Cruel. I repeated, my voice rising. I'm being cruel? You're the ones trying to take my college fund. Mom's jaw clenched. Then let me make this very clear, she said coldly. You have 2 weeks until your birthday to change your mind. If you don't agree to share that money with your sister, you can find somewhere else to live. The floor tilted beneath me. What? I whispered. You're kicking me out? Mom's face remained unmoved. No, Olivia. This is my house. And once you turn 18, you're an adult. I'm not legally obligated to support you anymore. I stared at her, my mind reeling. I can't believe this, I murmured. I can't believe you're choosing her over me. Again. Richard's voice was sharp. You're the one choosing money over family. I let out a hollow laugh. Family. I repeated, practically spitting the word. When have you ever treated me like family? Neither of them had an answer for that. Instead, Mom simply said, 2 weeks, Olivia. Think carefully about your choice. The next 3 days felt like living in a ghost town, except I was the only ghost. At breakfast, no one spoke to me. At dinner, my questions were met with cold silence. Jessica acted as if I didn't exist, while Mom and Richard treated me like an unwelcome guest who had overstayed her welcome. So I adapted. I ate my meals in my room, spent my free time at the library, made myself as invisible as they already saw me. Every night as I lay in bed, I could hear them downstairs laughing, talking, watching TV. A perfectly content family of 3. A family that no longer had space for a fourth. After that disastrous family meeting, I knew I had to act. My hands trembled as I dialed Mr. Reynolds's number, my grandmother's lawyer. My pulse raced, but when his familiar, steady voice answered, I felt a sliver of relief. Olivia, I was just thinking about you. Your 18th birthday is coming up soon. Yes, Mr. Reynolds. That's actually why I'm calling. Taking a steadying breath, I told him everything: Mom and Richard's demand for my college fund, their ultimatum, the looming threat of being forced out. He listened patiently, not interrupting until I had said it all. Then, after a pause, he cleared his throat. Legally, those funds belong to you the moment you turn 18. Your grandmother made sure of that. And to be frank, I believe she anticipated something like this happening. What do you mean? I asked, my fingers tightening around the phone. He hesitated briefly before replying. Let's just say she understood exactly who your mother was. And she wanted to protect you. Then he shifted gears. Now about your living situation. I held my breath. My suggestion? Choose a college, preferably somewhere far from them, then secure an apartment nearby. I'll help with the paperwork. You won't have direct access to the funds until your birthday, but we can get things in motion. That afternoon, I dove into research. By the evening, I had found it, a small but decent apartment within walking distance of State University where I had already been accepted with a full scholarship. The landlord, Mrs. Yang, was understanding. She agreed to hold the place for me with nothing more than my word that payment would come on my birthday. For the next week, I packed my belongings in secret. Late at night, while the house was quiet, I quietly tucked away books, clothes, pictures, my entire life, condensed into neat little boxes. Each item I placed inside was another step toward a future that was finally mine. Then the morning of my 18th birthday arrived. Mom cornered me in the kitchen, her arms folded. Well, she demanded. Have you made your decision? I met her gaze, my voice calm steady. Yes, I have. My answer is still no. Her lips pressed into a tight line. Then you know what that means. I do. I want you out of this house today. Her words were sharp, unyielding. Okay, I responded simply. I think my lack of reaction unsettled her. She had likely expected pleading, tears, desperation. Instead, I walked upstairs, grabbed my already packed boxes, and called the taxi I had scheduled in advance. 20 minutes later, I was unlocking the door to my new apartment. The first thing I did was call Mr. Reynolds. True to his word, the paperwork was ready, and by noon, my grandmother's fund was officially mine. By 1 o'clock, I had transferred the deposit in first month's rent to Mrs. Young. Later that afternoon, I walked to a nearby coffee shop, the same one where I had applied for a job a week earlier. The manager, Ryan, had agreed to hire me for the summer before classes started. My apartment was small, a simple studio with a kitchenette, but it was mine. That night, I sat cross-legged on an air mattress eating takeout, watching the sky darken through my one window. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something unexpected. Freedom. 2 weeks into my new life, during a break at the coffee shop, I idly scrolled through Facebook until my phone exploded with notifications. Have you seen your mom's post? Are you okay? What's going on? A sinking feeling settled in my gut. My fingers hovered for a moment before pulling up Mom's page. There it was. A long self-pitying rant drenched in melodrama. After everything we've done for her, my daughter has shattered our hearts. She refused to help her own sister, hoarding money while Jessica's dreams were put on hold. I never thought I'd raise such a selfish, ungrateful child. The comments were worse. Family should always come first. How could she be so heartless? What a spoiled brat. I stared at the screen, anger and disbelief churning inside me. And then something inside me snapped. Fine. If Mom wanted to make this public, let's tell the whole story. I opened my laptop and started typing. Since my mother has decided to broadcast our private family matters, I think it's only fair to share my side of the story. Yes, I refused to hand over my college fund, the fund my grandmother specifically left for me. What my mother conveniently failed to mention is that she gave me a choice. Give up my inheritance or get kicked out. On my 18th birthday, she followed through with that threat. For years, I watched my stepsister attend an elite private school while I went to public school. I saw her receive expensive clothes while I wore whatever was on sale. I worked hard. I earned straight A's. I secured a full scholarship to college. And yet, that still wasn't enough. They wanted my inheritance too. So yes, I chose to keep what was rightfully mine. And yes, I now live on my own, working and preparing for my future. But let's be clear, I didn't choose this. My mother did when she threw her own daughter out on her birthday. Asterisk. I hit post and went back to work. By the time my shift ended, my notifications had exploded. Former teachers, neighbors, even some of Mom's old friends flooded the comments, offering support, expressing shock, calling her out. People who had been watching from the sidelines for years finally spoke up, admitting they had noticed the favoritism but never said anything. Then my phone rang. Mom's name flashed across the screen. I answered. How dare you? She hissed. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? Mrs. Reynolds from church won't even look at me anymore. Half my friends are questioning my parenting. Maybe they should, I said, my voice eerily calm. You kicked your daughter out for refusing to give away her inheritance. What kind of parent is that? I did everything for you. No, Mom, I corrected. You did everything for Jessica. A tense silence stretched between us. And that's fine, I continued. She's your daughter now. But I'm done. Then without another word I hung up. Blocked her number. Blocked her on social media. Blocked Richard. Blocked Jessica. It was startlingly easy, like cutting away dead weight I had been carrying for years. Now I'm in my first semester at State University studying business management. My small apartment feels more like home every day. Sometimes I think about them, Mom, Richard, Jessica. But with each passing day those thoughts grow fewer, quieter. On my desk, a photo of Grandma Margaret sits in its frame. And sometimes I swear she's smiling at me. She knew. She knew that this money wasn't just for college. It was my ticket to freedom. And I'll never forget that.